Netflix and Disney on a lot of television shows. He's also been an illustrator for graphic novels for Marvel and Scholastic. And then I just found out that he did illustrations for a dating app called Dream Daddy. Yeah. Kind of funny. So I'll let him talk more about that, but hopefully you guys can learn a little bit about Pablo and his journey as an artist from Guatemala and also growing up on the East Coast as well.
Thank you. My name is Pablo Leon. I am an illustrator, designer, art director, filmmaker, comic writer, comic artist. So I do a little bit of everything. So because I knew that Ivan was going to be here, I knew that we kind of overlap on our kind of our roles. We do a lot of like similar things. I think that I'm gonna try to move it more towards being like a little more versatile as an artist, kind of moving in a different direction. But there is going to be some overlap because I saw the composition stuff. I have those images too, so we're gonna look at them again and we'll see. But yeah, like Brian said, I worked for a bunch of studios. I've worked for about a little bit over a decade in TV animation. Recently I was the assistant art director on Hamster and Gretel at Disney TV. I had a lot of fun working at Nickelodeon with Ghost of Molly McGee as well. And I started my career in a show called The Awesomes that I think 2 people watched. That it was like a superhero comedy for adults on Hulu. It was near the beginning of the streaming era, where everyone was like trying to figure out if was this gonna work, was this not gonna work. And I started that in Atlanta. That was like kind of my beginning journey there. It was a little different time and different ways of working. I would say that the big difference is that over here we have like a lot of protections through the Animation Guild, through a lot of the other unions. I think Atlanta at that point was it was like a boiling point of where a lot of things were happening. A lot of sweatshop kind of work was happening as well. Marvel was descending on the towns when they started filming a lot there. So things were really different there. So there was a lot of like the work was a little different. So I picked up a lot of ways of working there because it was a kind of production that would burn you out really fast. We were doing like about 12-hour days. It was kind of and so again, protections here are great to a certain extent, and yeah, I also worked on Muppet Babies, which I loved working there. That was like my first CGI show. It was really interesting because we had a lot of 2D sets with these 3D characters whenever they went into their imagination world, and you would think this would never work, and it really worked. It was really great the way they did that. And yes, I worked on a dating simulator called Dream Daddy. It was really really fun. I can't say that I played it because I didn't. It was not aimed at me at the time. I don't know. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with that game. There was a whole controversy about like a dungeon, a sex dungeon or something that was hidden in the code. I drew that dungeon, but I didn't know about it. I was just told like do this and that's that. And I also have a career in comics. I started in around 2019. I started working on Marvel and Scholastic's like first collaboration. The idea was that because we have a lot of these superhero characters that if you try to read the comics now, you have to like pick up a lot of issues, pick up a lot of like continuations, kind of trying to figure out what is this referencing to? Go on a Reddit hole trying to figure out like this is connected to a story in 2002. It was kind of it's a mess trying to do this. So I think with the success of the Spider-Verse movie, the first one, and it was kind of like, okay, we can create these books specifically aimed at kids, middle grade kids. So say if you know what Spider-Man is, who Spider-Man is, he swings, he cracks jokes, good enough. So you can go in and pick up these books and that's it. And so I worked on the first collaboration, and then I've done a few more since then. So in publishing, this is where I'm mostly known. I did have a lot of fun with these books. They are kind of like, I approached them as if they were picture books for kids, and I think that was really successful at the time. I think they're still making some more, and there's like a bit of that style still there, so I was really happy. Whoa, what the fuck? Okay. I'm not gonna touch that. And then like I mentioned, I'm an author. I also did my own books. Silent Voices, which, shameless plug, you can buy it now. It came out in September. And this is a book about that takes place during the Guatemalan Civil War and the generational fallout that follows, and how there's a lot of first and second generation Latinos, not just necessarily Guatemalans, but like that sometimes they don't have, they're not aware of the history of their country, and kind of how do we talk about those particular types of conflicts. So very, very different than Spider-Man, than the Miles Morales movies, comics. But that's kind of what I do. And then in the journey, I was able to interview a girl that she came from Central America across Mexico in 2005, all on her own, and she was on a company child that in the early 2000s. At the time, there was like a spike of that happening, so I was able to interview her. I did a short story about it a couple of years ago, and this is a story that got me an Eisner nomination. I didn't win; I just went to get the free dinner, and it was great. But it opened a lot of doors for me. And I was mentioning to someone, I am actually remaking this story for proper publishing, and that's coming out in next year. And I was able to re-interview this person, and I feel like I'm gonna jump the gun a little bit of this, but I think the best thing about doing things and just making things is that you can redo them later. You can be and make them better as you become better. With the journey, I'm not a journalist, and I think I did this interview with this person, and it was very basic. And as I move on with my life, with my projects, I got better at it, and now I was able to track her down, kind of talk to her again, and just have a better conversation. And I got so much more from that, and that I wish I was thinking. I was like, oh man, I should have done that. I should talk about this, but yeah, no, I think that's kind of something that I'm going to touch on later, is the importance of just don't wait for permission, just doing them. And some of the animation projects that I made for myself, they're more on the historical memory and social themes. Remember Us was a short film that got us Oscar qualified a couple of years ago, and it was about 3 people that lived through the Salvadoran Civil War and kind of like where they are at the present time. Sagnite and The Spirit of the Mask was a short that I produced it's all in spoken Quiche language and from Guatemala. It's kind of like a little fable of celebration of the indigenous culture in my country. Aurora, which is this one, I'm still in development on that, but that one talks about the what happens after all these conflicts in Latin America is the resurgence of illegal mining and kind of that displays a lot of communities, sometimes very violent, most of the time very violent. So it's kind of like a commentary that with a monster. It's a horror. I myself don't like horror, not because I don't like it, because I'm a coward. I don't like being scared. But I think for this particular one, I decided to approach this as what scares me is everything, and then just put it in there. And to the other side talks about their journey of refugee children through in a way that's created so kids can understand it and create empathy about this particular types of stories. This is based on a picture book called To the Other Side by Erika Mesa. Again, things that I'm just developing on my own, that I think because they're important to me. And again, we'll touch it later on the whole process of not waiting for someone to give you permission to do them. And kind of on this whole long introduction to me, this is the topic of this conversation, is there are no rules, only consequences. And I thought long and hard about this because I think as I looked at my career, I feel like I've tried to do things in the way that are traditional, standard. I've read all these books. Dreamworld is a particular favorite. I read that book like every other year, and I always get something good out of it. I love Hans Backer, which is the writer for that. And he has another book. I don't remember the name right now. It's really great. But as I move forward with my career, I realize that a lot of these are treated like rules, and I think they're really good to know. It's really good to learn them. But at the end of the day, as artists, like, I don't know that rules are necessarily what we need. I think it's a need to be able to say what we need to in a visual way and back it up. So, but we'll go into that. I wanted to show a little bit about the treatment of how production works. This is also in Dreamworlds. I think this particular one is more about how feature used to work at some point. It's changed a little bit. There's, I think, a lot of the same elements. So I want to focus mostly on the story writing and environment, production environment, and background, because I think those are important to this conversation. If you guys want to take a picture of that, go ahead. It's a little old, but it's very similar. A lot of everything overlaps in production. The way I work is I use the story diamond key. The diamond is it's basically a 3-act structure. Holy shit. Hold on, let me move this a little bit. Okay. So the story diamond it works for me because I'm a visual person. I always imagine it as, always say it's like Act 1, 2, 2A, 2B, and 3. And you keep building elements to it, and it just becomes a bigger diamond. It's the basic story structure. And I think for this particular situation, let's talk about Gladiator. If you guys have seen Gladiator, the movie. I say that and I think about it, it's a really old movie now, and I feel old. So with Gladiator, the inciting incident is that this is killing the king in the beginning, and Maximus starts out as a warrior who is basically pushing back against what he needs to do, against his own status quo. And then he becomes a slave. And that's kind of the bargaining. The bargaining in this situation is kind of a state of grief where they bargain making a deal with themselves or a higher power. with Maximus in the situation, he makes a deal with his slave owner, who later becomes his friend, kind of. And it's like his deal is, fight your way out of this, and you'll get your revenge. Moment of Grace is that bargain works, and then he wins. And at the end, it's depression and acceptance. At the end, he becomes a martyrdom, but he accepts his fate, and he dies in grace in some form. And I think that's the basic act structure. It doesn't have to be anything complicated, but I would say that it's okay, and I think it goes back to there's no rules. This is kind of a rule that you don't have to follow. And I want to talk about one particular piece that breaks that mold, and is a movie called Weathering with You, which, if anyone's familiar with a film called Your Name, it's by the same director. Your Name was a very pleasant movie. Weathering with You, it's a little complicated because it starts out with the similar structure and introducing the same elements, and then at the very end, when you have this moment where the hero or the hero's loved ones need to be sacrificed, and there's got to be a moment of okay, we have to either do this or find another way. The hero just lets the whole world burn, literally not burn but drown. And spoilers, I'm sorry if you wanted to watch this. It's still great though. And then we get a bittersweet epilogue that shows the consequences of that decision, and it's not particularly pleasant per se, but it's just different. It breaks the 3-act structure in a way that is not. It doesn't cradle you. It doesn't make you feel good, but it's really interesting. So this is what I mean when I say there's no rules. I think as long as you are able to back these elements, back your voice, I think it will work. As long as you're able to just prove that this not prove, but show that this will work for you. At the end of the day, I will always say that you as the artist, you as a director, as a creator, you are your first audience, and then the overall people afterwards are second. So you should always make things for you. So all that said, I did want to talk about, because we talk about background design, background illustration. I do want to talk about composition, because at the end of the day, it is very important to all of this. Kind of like what Ivan said, it's a framing effect where all the background elements they lead towards the character. The character will always be the most important thing in the shot, but all these elements need to work to lead towards the character. So again, this is the first scene of Cinderella, where she's entering the castle, and if you look at it as just you watch the shot the first time, she gets lost, but she's not lost at the same time. It's not. You have all these big structures that are working to frame her. You have all these lines, invisible lines, that are pointing at her. Everything always points at her. All the perspective lines, everything. A successful design, a successful background design, environment piece, it's always about the composition and what you're framing, what you're trying to frame. I think there's always the case of something that looks really extremely complicated and lush, and there's so many elements, and you become impressed by it, but if there's no focal point, it's not successful. And so breaking all these down is always very simple. Breaking it down into 2 to 3 values is always the key to me. I think you can always create more built from those particular shapes and create and frame things as you move forward. So, and again, this is all from and DreamWorlds creates these cases for it. Using simple shapes, you can start building your shots. It's always about framing your character. And as I was just telling somebody else earlier, like I think if there's no particular character, it needs to be a focal point within the background. I do feel like treating a background like a character helps a lot. Especially it helps if you are struggling with liking backgrounds. I myself, I enjoy them. I play a lot of video games where like walking simulators essentially. Like you just walk around and like it's like, look at this tree, this is great. I spend like hours just looking at rocks and creating compositions with those, and I think that's probably one way to just enjoy them. Like kind of I hate to say this, but kind of just stepping out and touching grass is one way of just trying to connect and enjoy what you're gonna draw. Like enjoy the scenery, enjoy the texture that you're touching, that you're looking. And I think once you start thinking about the situation, thinking about them as characters, as objects that matter, I think that probably will unlock something. It works for me, at least. I can't say it works for everyone, but so in this particular case with the compositions, it's always like kind of finding framing devices. So breaking composition, they're made up of order, rhythm, and balance. So this is where I feel it's a little. This is where I'm gonna deviate again, because balance is achieved, between space, negative space, and that surrounds objects. I would even say that the rule of thirds kind of falls into this, and normally something like this where it says try to avoid. I would say that we see a lot of these types of compositions in TV, not because we want to, but it's because of the speed that we're trying to like create, create backgrounds, create all these assets with a crunched schedule. So that said, I do have a bit of I feel like I do deviate, and I sort of agree with the way that Walt Paragoy used to talk about. Walt Paragoy was the one that created the look of 101 Dalmatians. He was at some point slated to be on Jungle Book, and they took him out of there because when he was creating these pieces, these backgrounds, they felt they were like a little too dense. There was a lot of objects that weren't completely working. The negative space wasn't working with the characters. And there's a particular interview that, if you can hunt it down, when he was still alive, and mind you, it is a very explicit interview, but he talks about that situation, and he talks about how, like, if a character moves, it reads. And I kind of agree with it, and I know it's not necessarily always the right way of doing it, but I do think that when we do create a lot of work to create all these compositions to work for the character, but at the end of the day, if a character moves, it will read. Maybe it won't read necessarily the way that we want it to, and this is where we come there as to fix that. But I do agree with that, and I do think that not necessarily. Sometimes it's okay to have like a bit of unbalance in your backgrounds, because if something will move, you will see it. Your eye will read it, and super debatable. And I don't know that everyone agrees with that, but again, consequences. Similarly, rhythm. So rhythm is to direct the viewer's eye to the center of interest. It works with different objects, foreground objects, middle ground objects, creating details that point to the character, but also secondary action, whether it's other background elements. So this also works within the camera arrangements. So if your camera moves, you also have to work for that. So a lot of the stuff that we do in design and background design, we work for the camera. We're not necessarily making paint art pieces. I mean, we are, but at the same time, everything needs to work for the camera. So when you connect all of these elements, then that's what the visual language of your film will be. So if you have, I guess let me just, I think it's better if I show you an example. This is a movie called Identifying Features. In Spanish is Sin Señas Particulares. It's by director Fernanda Valadez. It's a really grim movie. I recommend it because it's really good, but it's also very, very grim. It's about a woman that's looking for her kid in Mexico who migrated north, but she just wants to know if he's alive. And a lot of the compositions in this film center around her. Like literally, she is the center of in almost every shot, and a lot of these elements work. A lot of the elements around her work for that. So for these shots, when you start breaking it down in this way, like you have all these perspective lines, all these elements that are pointing always at her. In this particular shot with the silhouette, you have elements of the character that start creating this rhythm around the silhouetted, the light source that creates the silhouette is also like working to frame this character. So this is kind of what I mean with this composition. It's always like having a framing device for these characters, for these situations. I also always encourage to watch really messy movies because they always have really interesting ways of composing shots. Just watch for your mental health for that. Same thing here. I think this is these are some of these better shots as well. Creating balance around your characters, framing just pieces. It's always like this. You get these interesting moments. Everything, like for instance in the one below, everything is sort of like points at this guy. Like we see these people on the side, but he's the important character. He's the one that we're always going to be seeing. So using all of those are always like thinking about the way to frame your characters in your background. So when you create a background design, background paint, even if it's a portfolio device, a portfolio piece, is always like, what are you creating for? What is the focal point? What are we looking for? So I made this film called Remember Us, and Remember Us had a similar, we approached this in the same way that we approach production. We did this a little different. So there's multiple ways of creating background designs. I think the more traditional way is you do black and white line and then you do color. There's other productions that do complete black and white painting and then jump into color. I think those productions are a little insane sometimes, but that's kind of what we did on our end. So, because a lot of us in the production, we were all like background designers. I feel like we were trying to flex, and I think at some point we flexed maybe too hard, and it became like a little hard to maintain. But we maintained the same situation, the same principles in that production, this indie production, and it's always about composition, shapes, and edges, and how all of those need to frame these characters. And we had like references. We had all these references to keep us like in check. And I think I haven't covered more color on that, so I'm not gonna cover too much on that on the color side of things. But we did afterwards with color and textures that really elevated things, and I can show you guys a little bit of those backgrounds for those for that production. And you know, kind of in this. The middle one on the left. A lot of these are all about framing the characters. So on that one, two groups were coming together and they were gonna cross to each other. So you have all these elements that are framing them. They're coming from that side, the right one, they're coming from the other side. And eventually they come together in this middle part. And you have all these lines that are pointing at them. You have the shadow that will like block its side, and you're gonna see them. So it's always about working for the character. In this same production, in the same short, we used a lot of references. So Fernando Yort was an illustrator from El Salvador, and he created a lot of and I never know how to say this word properly, so I'm sorry. Mosaics, yeah, thanks. He had a lot of mosaics in El Salvador. A lot of them were about the history of the country, but also the history of the conflict. They had a big civil war that from the 80s through the 90s. So that was what the show was about. And so we reference his work in moments of big stress for the characters during the film, like when they were in this point of extreme just stress, and so it became like a little more, I don't want to say magical, but it was like kind of like a situation where we started referencing his work in there. And I think that's kind of like, I wanted to point at this because I think understanding how to use reference in your work is super important, because we weren't just copying what he did. We were taking elements, shapes, little bits of things that he would have done, or what we assume he would have done, and applying them to different elements. So we weren't necessarily copying it, but we're kind of like using a lot of his motifs. And I think that's a super important thing to consider and remember, that we weren't just, not just to copy a particular reference, but also understand that reference and how to apply it without seemingly like you're just like redrawing it. And let's see, and here's a little bit of that more color scripts for that film. And let me see. The other film that I worked on, and the Spirit of the Mask. So that one, we also used a lot of framing devices on this, because this character that we followed for most of it was basically this little ball of light. And so he already stands out. So we needed to balance all these elements, all these lights around him, so they wouldn't compete. And so in that particular case, we did work a lot on the color script, so that wouldn't happen too much, and I think that was pretty successful. This film is still in the festival circuit, but yeah. Let me see. So, and I mentioned that I work in comics. With Miles Morales, because I come from at that point when I was working on this, I come from the design side of things. I think design for animation. So I approached this in a way that I would have approached maybe a picture book or a background design, where I told myself, every panel needs a background. which is an insane thing to do. You don't need that. If you're doing comics, don't do what I do. But it looks cool, but it does, like, I think after a certain number of pages it becomes a problem. But again, similar situation. Every panel has its purpose on not just on the layout, on how you read it, but also like what we're leading onto, what we need to look. Like on this one in particular, all the lines that are pointing out towards this character that's throwing a bomb. Miles's hands, they're kind of like leading you to these characters that are speaking. This smoke shape is also like the framing device, and it's just like the divided to these two characters. A lot of these building elements point towards the next panel. So there's always a purpose to these things. And let me see. With comics, you can also do a lot of different things. Like in this particular panel, the first one, I think the script called for 2 panels. One where Miles is looking for this character, and then we see her coming with a bike. And there was 3 panels. It was one where we see her coming in a bike, and then Miles coming being like, "Oh, we see her." That was just a lot of panels in that script. So the way we can do a lot of play with the composition is, at the end of the day, this is like a visual medium that, because it's not going to be seen shot by shot, you can just play with the idea of like, oh, here's an instant panel, is this character already seen it, pointing at her, and it's all in one panel, it doesn't have to be divided. So it's just kind of like the importance of working smartly in pages. That way what happens with comics is you get burnt out quite a bit. I think the other thing with comics is each panel, if you look at it as shots, the longer it is or the bigger it is, it equals to, say, like a longer shot. If it's smaller, it's like a quick cut. So I would say for this particular example, it's like all these things are happening. This is like the establishing shot of this area, and all these like quick consecutive cuts. Again, this is all just like how I would approach this, though. If you look at something like Persepolis, completely different. So again, just these aren't rules. These are just things that work well, so we can read things, but they're not necessarily rules. Oh, I like this. This is my cat, actually. So, talking about development with the sense of illustration in comics. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this part. I know that it's not necessarily connected to animation per se, but I did wanted to bring this up because animation and comics kind of go hand in hand, especially these days. You have a lot of IPs that start in comics and become animation. So when I started all of this, my career started. I wanted to do comics. That was my thing. I fell into animation accidentally, which is not a bad thing. It's definitely not a bad career to fall into. But initially I wanted to do comics, and my particular thing was that I grew up in Guatemala. Guatemala is a really pretty place. We have a ton of volcanoes. We have really great coffee. I maintain personally that we have the best tamales, everyone from every region. I know that this is like a hill that I will die on, and normally this doesn't go well in California when I say this, but they're just really good. They're just way better. But we had a big conflict. We had a big civil war, and it lasted 36 years. It ended in 96. There was just so many victims. So many people disappeared, and I grew up at the tail end of that. And so when I came to the U.S., it was sort of like unknown, essentially. So that kind of what drove me in some way, and this is kind of where I started finding my voice, because I wanted to talk about this. So I started putting together this project. It used to be called Forgotten Genocide, and it collected history and witnesses accounts of different events that happened in Central America. I think just from the title alone, you can tell that this is like a little edgy at this point. And I was kind of really glad that when I took this out there maybe 10, 12 years ago, like no one really bit. I think when I initially pitched it as a graphic novel, it was like, this feels like a history book. This reads like a history book, so you can just go pick up a history book, and it was kind of that. But that was just really what I wanted to do. I wanted to talk about it. So this is what ended up happening. So Silent Voices became the Guatemalan side of things. It kind of, there was like a split, and then Remember Us became this mini semi-documentary about the Salvadoran Civil War. But both of them cover the same themes. They cover the violence against women and children. That's kind of what happens in these conflicts. You have usually the targeted victims tend to be women, tend to be children. Loss of languages. In Guatemala, we have like 23 indigenous languages, but a lot of them are dwindling. Same thing with El Salvador with the Nahuatl. Like, there was a massacre and it was just kind of dwindling. And through all of that, mostly what I really wanted to focus was on talking about the past, because that restores people's dignity. It's not just the dead, but also the disappeared, the ones that we'll never know where they are, or we'll probably never find them. So where I'm going with this is, don't wait for permission. Just do it. When I started this book, when I did the split on Silent Voices, I started it, and this was kind of like the layout that I when I pitched it, it was like 10 pages that I drew that kind of talked about a little bit of the history of what was happening in the 80s with the US, the connection, the war and everything. And this was the final, how it looks now in the final printed piece. And I did that one maybe 10 years ago. And there was a lot of rejection to it. There was just always a lot of like, we don't want to talk about this. Why do you want to talk about this? But I think it's part of like trying to find your voice, your artistic voice, and talking about the important things to you. So in that notion is like, it's better to just do them and keep pressing than just waiting for someone to tell you that you can't do this or not. So that's kind of where all that rambling went from, basically. It's like, it's a good thing to try to find your voice, and even if it doesn't really fit into the mold of what is going on the design level, on the current slate of films that are happening or comics that are happening. It's always about talking about the things that you like in a way that you can do it, even if it means like not doing it with the same set of rules that we normally do it. Last tidbits on this. And I think, kind of talking about that, I want to talk about the whole indie versus corporate situation. And I think Ivan touched a little bit on that. The commercial appeal versus the artistic voice. Essentially, trying to find your artistic voice, it's not easy. It takes years. It's a very awkward stage that it will take a while. And it just means trying to go beyond your references. It doesn't always fit within the mold of the corporate world. When we talk about corporate, I mean the studio system. A lot of time, the studio system has a very specific house style, and for many of us, we worked on the house style too. Sometimes we have to like follow that. I would say that something for reference, the work of Alberto Mielgo in Spider-Verse. It was so prolific, and everyone started working on that style. Everyone started mimicking that way or another, and it became like the go-to look for a lot of productions as well. For that to happen, he did do a lot he put a lot of effort into what he was doing. That was kind of his artistic voice, and it took forever. It wasn't like an overnight thing. So this is kind of where you kind of have to find that balance of like, do you want to work on your own stuff, your own voice, even though it's gonna take probably a lot of years, and there might not be a lot of incentives to that, because after all, we all have to pay rent, and we have to do things that we don't, for money that we probably don't like, and have to work on projects that we don't necessarily, feel good about. And so that's kind of where we are right now, especially in this industry. So, and another point of concern is also like the specialist versus generalist. So I think when you're putting together a portfolio, they usually tell you have to focus on one branch. So if you're a character designer, that's all what you're gonna be. You're a background designer, you might be able to jump into background paint. I've done that, but like not everyone does it. The track to art direction is usually on the backgrounds side. If you're a writer, then your track is to be a showrunner, and you're kind of there. So that's kind of the standard in the US. You are put in a box, and you kind of like, you have to be a specialist on these situations. So the rest of the world doesn't quite move like that, and I'm mentioning this because right now, the way that the industry is moving right now is more global. We're more connected, and a lot of things are made outside of the US now. So I think in this way, I don't necessarily agree that we all have to just stick to one track. If you want to be a background designer, that's great. But I think if you want to be a background designer and a character designer at the same time, I think it's completely valid to explore those options, because outside of the industry in the US, that is like a very normal thing. So this is, again, run the rules on the consequences, because once you start doing that, then you're kind of splitting yourself into different focus group things. Like, you focus on background design, but you also focus on character design. You can do both, but you can really just maybe like get really good at one, or you can be good enough at everything. So that's kind of where we are. Again, this is kind of where we are right now. Maybe 5 years will be very different, but this is sort of where the industry is sort of moving in that direction. And I did wanted to talk a little bit about the whole fan art on portfolio. I know that usually it's frowned upon to put fan art in there, and that's actually true. But I would say that it's okay to do fan art, and it's absolutely okay to keep posting it, because what happened with fan art for me was, okay, so what's happening in 2019? We're all trying to get Popeye's chicken sandwiches. I was just talking to a friend about this before I got here, and he said they hated it, and I was kind of like, how dare you? We could not get into the fucking line on that. But what was happening as well was also into the Spider-Verse. That was massive. That was a game changer. A lot of people that worked in that movie have gone on to dictate the look of a lot of other movies right now. A lot of people that worked on that were leads on Turtles, were leads on the Mitchells versus the Machines, and so forth. So when that happened, I was like blown away just like everyone else. And I did do, I created a couple of pieces. I was like really, because I was really into the movie. So these are the ones that I made and I posted it online. And what ended up happening was an editor at Marvel saw those and they reached out to me to work on Mile Morales Shockwaves. That's kind of how I got into that particular gig. It was just through making fan art. So I know that there's always the whole case of, work on your originals, focus on that part, and that is true, but I think it's also okay to be a fan of things and celebrate things, because if you're trying to, especially within the studio system, if you're trying to get into something, that's one way, especially to get attention of editors, art directors, and so forth. They are still looking at things. Algorithms have changed since then, and that's true. The way Twitter or Instagram worked then doesn't necessarily work the same way, but there's still a lot of similarities. So I'm always in favor of doing this. I think maybe not necessarily putting it in the portfolio, but still making them, still posting. And I think to end this, I did, because I do focus more on a lot of animated projects that are not necessarily like more commercial, but like I do have like a couple of inspirations that have been really good for me. Flea is a really great documentary that frames it's about this man who leaves the Middle East in the 80s, and he kind of ends up in Europe, and it's all framed from the perspective of him going to therapy. It's all animated. It's fantastic. Funan is about the Cambodian revolution in the 70s. La Casa del Lobo it's about also the 70s in Chile. There was a Nazi compound in Chile, and this is like a stop motion kind of enactment of what was happening there. It's visually, it's like a horror movie. I always recommend. I've watched the movie once, and for me that was enough. But I always recommend this movie because I think there's visually there's a lot of it that's just like really interesting, unsettling, but also like unsettling because of the situation that was happening. So, and Another Life, it's visually it's not super interesting, but it does cover some of the. It follows a journalist that's a Polish journalist that was covering the Angola War, and visually it looks like it's a weird CGI, but I think just the idea that they applied this, they tried to do this in animation is absolutely bonkers. I think it's effective enough in what it was trying to convey, which is the horror war at the end. So yeah, I think these are super interesting. If you're looking for something that's a little less commercial, I think these are really good. Again, Casa del Lobo just once, don't watch it more than once. Yeah, that's really all I have for me. Yeah. I don't know if you have any questions. Yeah.
So I was curious that you've done all this work on the comics, and in doing that, you do all those different backgrounds, and particularly for cities that have so many different details. Mm-hmm. How did you kind of come to approach drawing so specifically those urban backgrounds, in kind of like a timely manner? Did you have any tips or tricks or anything that you kind of learned?
Yeah. So I would say that if you're creating a background portfolio, or if you look at a lot of productions, I think drawing forests and drawing trees is really nice, but most of the time, most productions, most shows take place in the city, take place in a suburban area or something like that. So you have to really get used to drawing a lot of buildings, a lot of houses, that architecture. So it's really just simplifying it. A lot of them are the way that I approach things is, if it's a city, I approach it from the beginning as everything is just a flat shape. So everything is just rectangles. And afterwards, then I started like, adding a little more detail, adding details on the windows, what kind of perspective point we're talking about. But like everything is always derivative from the very, very basic box, basically. So not getting bogged down with the details of like what kind of windows are this, what kind of signs are in this building, what kind of cracks are in this building. No, just one square first, and then you start building it. The more detail happens towards closer you are to the camera. So as things recede, you can get away with a lot of like shortcuts. You can get away with a lot of flatness, and because that's what happens in real life. Like if you start looking at the buildings, especially in the city, everything just seems it's just flat. So it kind of works. It's of course, if you start looking at too close, then yeah, of course you start seeing like this probably needs a little more perspective. But for the purpose of a shot or for a background, it works. It's just a matter of like starting simple, and as things recede, they become flatter, and that helps. That helps with the mileage as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you talked about finding your but I'd love to know any inspirations you had, or how you came to find your ways in art.
I think for me it was, like I mentioned before, it was the way that when I came to the States, no one really knew about these particular events that happen in my country, and that really, I guess, in some weird ego petty trip, it made me want to do this. And I think when I was in high school, I was reading a lot of superhero books, and I think that was the first time that I was exposed to Mouse, the graphic novel, and Persepolis. If you don't know what Mouse is essentially, it's the story of the Holocaust, but it's made in a way where with mice and cats. And Persepolis is like a memoir about the Iranian Revolution. And I was really blown away because, and there's also Persepolis the movie too. It's just really great. I was really blown away because I was like, you can talk about these things in comics, and then later with Persepolis the movie, it's like, oh, you can talk about these things in movies. Oh my god! So that was kind of my awakening on that. And for me, it has been a lot of formative years working in TV animation. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about pipelines and how to approach productions and the technical side of things. But I think for me, it was like these stories that I wanted to talk to that are more about, historical memory, problems that we've lived in the region that I grew up with. Those were the things that were moving me. So it was always a little bit hard to it's always been a little bit hard for me to work in production sometimes. But I would say also that it has helped because the types of themes that I work with are also sometimes very heavy. So if I work at night on, say, when I was working on Remember Us, the Salvadoran War movie, I would work at night on that, and during the day I was working on a really stupid show about a flying hamster. So it was like there was a really good balance on that. Like I would be less depressed, I would say. Yeah. Yes, Persepolis and yeah. It's just kind of,
I think it's a short structure. There's a lot of building, especially in your acting.
how did I get into it?
Yeah.
Oh man, so I watched The Book of Life when I was in college, and I went to a talk with Jorge Gutierrez where he talks about how like he went to get the Save the Cat book, and so I went to get the Save the Cat book, and it's a very standard book. It's how to craft a story for mainstream film essentially, and it worked. And then I started applying that to a lot of things that I was looking around, and I was like, oh, okay, this kind of works. And then I applied it to a comic, and it worked too. And that's basically how I started. After that, then I started breaking that mold, because I think Save the Cat is a very basic structure that it works for what it needed to work at the time. But I do think we kind of move away from that, and especially if you start seeing more like international film, that's they break that entirely. So, but yeah, I think I started with Save the Cat. I started reading a lot of scripts. If you ever read the Coco script, it's actually really one-on-one with the movie. It's like really amazing, and that really helped a lot on like how to not like get bogged down with details too. Like when you're writing things, especially as like visual people like me, I'm not a flowery writer. I can't do that. And I think there's a really great talk with Guillermo del Toro where he talks about how like you don't have to do that in the script. It's really nice when you read one that reads like a book, but it just needs to do its purpose, which is like where the camera's gonna go, how is it gonna go, who's feeling what, doesn't matter. It's just like that's a discussion between the actors. But yeah, so essentially, that was essentially how I got into it.
You said Save the Cat.
Yeah. Just mind you, it's not a great book. It's really good to like learn the basics, but there's others. There's another one I read. I don't remember it now. I'll find it later. But yeah.